Sir, good morning. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, thank you very much.
And can you see Mr. Roll?
Yes, I can.
May I therefore call Richard Roll, please?
Yeah.
Repeat after me, please.
Yes.
I do solemnly,
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Good morning, Mr. Roll. Can you see and hear me clearly?
Yes, thank you.
As you know, my name is Jason Beer and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. Can you give us your full name, please?
Richard William Roll.
Can I extend the inquiry's thanks for the provision of a witness statement by you and for attending to give evidence remotely today? You should have in front of you a pack of hard copy documents, the first of which, tab A, is a witness statement that you made on the 2nd of February this year. It's 18 pages long. Can I invite you to open that and confirm that that is your witness statement?
Yes, it is.
For the inquiry's reference, the URN for that is WITN 0078 0100. Can you turn to the 15th page of it, please?
Yes,
Is that your signature?
it is.
And then if you turn back to the first page, to the first line, where it says, I joined the RAF in 1974, should that read 1976?
It should.
And other than that correction, are the contents of the witness statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you some questions today about issues that the inquiry has grouped together in what we call phase 3 of the inquiry, namely your role in the operation of the Horizon system and the work of the SSC, which is variously described in Fujitsu documents and the Post Office as the System Service Centre, the System Support Centre, or the Software Support Centre. They're all referring to the same thing, and I'm going to call it the SSC today. Do you understand?
Yes.
I'm not going to ask you questions about what the Post Office did in relation to and in response to your appearance on Panorama in 2015, nor am I going to ask you questions about the basis of many of the suggestions that were put to you over the course of a day and a half's cross-examination on the 13th and 14th of March 2019, when you appeared as a witness in the Bates and Post Office trial in the High Court just down the road from here. And nor am I going to ask you questions about the treatment more generally of your evidence by the Post Office in the trial, nor the conclusions that Mr. Justice Fraser drew about the accuracy and reliability of your evidence. Do you understand?
Yes.
All of those issues, or some of them, may be examined later in the inquiry, but we do not need your evidence in order to examine them. So can I start then with your background and experience? As we've just established, I think you joined the RAF in 1976, is that right?
That's right.
In one of your statements prepared for the Bates litigation, you say that your title in the RAF was avionics engineer. Is that right?
Yes.
And you tell us in that statement that you worked on a variety of mainframe computer systems and that you were selected for a software development team working on aircraft control and attack systems. Is that right?
Broadly speaking, yes.
I think it's right that in your time in the RAF, you obtained a City and Guilds Level 3 certificate in electronics.
Yes.
You obtained an ONC in electronics engineering.
Yes.
And you obtained an HNC in software engineering.
I did all of the modules for that and got distinctions and credits, but I never completed the final module, so I never actually obtained final HNC.
I understand. Thank you for that clarification. And then after 14 years or so in the RAF, in 1989, you left. Is that right?
That's right.
And over the next 12 years or so, you undertook a range of work, including, I think, bringing up some children on your own before joining Fujitsu in January 2001.
Yes.
Can we just look at page 17 of your witness statement? It will come up on the screen, or you can follow in the hard copy. Page 17, please. Ah. That seems to have been redacted. Is it redacted in the copy that you've got?
Which page am I looking at? Page 17 on my witness statement.
Yeah, it's the second page of your CV.
Oh, right, yes. I've got it in front of me here.
You've got it in front of you?
Yes.
And okay. I think you, working from the bottom upwards, we can take that down from the screen, thank you. Working from the bottom upwards, the first job after the RAF, was that working in robotics, essentially?
Yes.
And then the job above that, between August 1990 and March 1991, was that software development?
Software support and development, yes. We were rolling out a product in the UK, and some of it had to be modified as we went along for the UK customers.
And then May 91 to December 92, a business process analyst. What was that?
The company, New Information Paradigms, it was pre-internet. They had a product which could interrogate databases such as Reuters, some of the online financial databases, etc. It could access those overnight, download the information, format it, print a document so that in the morning you would have an up-to-date management report on what the competitors were doing, etc. At the time, it was all cutting-edge stuff. It was written in language very much like HTML is today, but as I say, it predated the internet by several years.
Thank you. And then for 2.5 years, as I've said, you worked looking after your children.
Yes, I tended to do odd jobs for, I worked for the Natural History Museum on a database project in the evenings from home. I'd take the children to school during the day, pick them up at school, get them to bed, and then I'd work until 2 o'clock in the morning or so on the database projects, and then get some sleep. Kids to school in the morning, a couple of more hours sleep, get up at lunchtime, do the housework, etc.
I see.
The kids.
And then between June 95 and July 95, you were a desktop implementation engineer. What does that mean?
That was the title. There was a company called TAL. Again, it was really when IT was still taking off, as it were. It had been set up by a previous employee at Glaxo to manage or help manage Glaxo's IT systems. He then contracted into them, if you like. So we were responsible for configuring desktop computers, installing them, building them from scratch in some cases, training people on the software that was being used on them, so on and so forth. And
then for the same company, you worked as a systems procurement analyst. Can you explain what that is, please?
Yeah, they then needed someone, again through TAL, to work. There was a problem on the Glaxo research and development side. They weren't getting the equipment they needed and the software and hardware they needed to be able to process the data get the drugs to market. Basically, they needed someone else there to help speed up the process. So I was asked to step in and help with purchasing, analysing what equipment they needed, what desktops, what processing power, and that was best for their needs. So then I would then source the equipment, and get the purchasing done to get it onto the desks as quickly as possible.
And then after that, between January and December 1996, you worked in the same company again as a project manager. Is that right?
Yes, Glaxo merged with Wellcome at that time. So there was a lot of staff at Dartford, we had a lot of data, a lot of systems. They needed bringing in line with the Glaxo equipment. Some of the staff were made redundant. The rest of them were being transferred to another site.
And then towards the top of the page there, 2 jobs. Firstly, as a systems manager, and then as a project manager.
Yes.
Did any of that involve work with software, or writing software, or coding?
The job with CRO Catalysts, I was responsible for looking after all of the software in the UK and Europe. So that involved configuring software on servers in The Hague, also in Switzerland, and the UK. That was more setting up the software rather than coding or writing it.
And thank you. And then the foot of the preceding page, in early 99, and then for the rest of 99 and to the middle of June 2000, a configuration center manager, and then a system support analyst. Can you describe what those jobs were, please?
Yeah, sure. The configuration center manager, Bytech had a large facility in Bracknell, configuring IBM mini computers, setting up the software, etc. They were moving the whole process to Germany and closing down the UK facility. The manager in the UK had moved that to Germany, and they needed someone else to step in while they closed the rest of the facility down in the UK. So I took it over for that period, for a short period of time, to run it whilst they moved most of the stuff out. We still had some work to do.
And the system support analyst?
That was running a third, if you like, of the global sales database software. I was responsible for managing the software in Egypt, Greece, Tunisia, the Middle Eastern areas, part of Africa, most of Europe, most of Eastern Europe. That involved writing code for I'm trying to remember exactly what the terms were. Basically, the sales reps would input the data in their various countries. That would then be consolidated into a database in the UK. That was an Oracle database, I think. So I had to manage the Oracle database, also write the scripts to interrogate the database so that the sales reports could be generated correctly. There were often issues with data coming in from various countries that would be out of sync. So that all had to be sorted out, turn the database off, go in, sort the code out, sort the actual records out, put it all back together, and then resync it with the databases in Greece, Romania, wherever.
I understand. Thank you. And then I think you took up employment for a period of 3 years and 6 months between January 2001 and August 2004 with Fujitsu.
Yes.
The job title that I've seen for you was IT Product Specialist. Is that right?
I think so, yes.
You worked in 3rd and 4th line support in the SSC, is that right?
Yes. I think now that it would probably class more as 3rd line support. There was some development, but probably better described as 3rd line support.
Thank you. And was your work focused almost exclusively, therefore, on the investigation and resolution of issues and problems with the Horizon system?
Yes.
Did that involve you dealing directly with sub-postmasters and others employed in branches?
Yes.
You were, I think, based at the Fujitsu offices in Bracknell for the entirety of that period.
Yes.
Can I ask about the size of the SSC team? In one of your statements, you say that there were over 30 individuals working on the same floor as you in Bracknell. By that, were you meaning they were all in the SSC?
Not all of them. Some of them would have been in the testing team. Probably, I think there were 25 to 30 SSC members and half a dozen or more people in the test.
Thank you. And so that 25 to 30, were they all doing the same or substantially the same job as you?
Substantially the same job as me, yes.
Did you manage anyone?
No.
How many managers were there of the SSC?
Just one, as far as I can recall.
And who was the manager of the SSC?
Nick Peach.
Did he have a deputy?
Steve Parker stood in for him when he wasn't there, yeah.
And what was the structure of the team? How were there 25 to 30 of you, other than Mr. Parker and Mr. Peach, arranged or organised, if you can remember?
It was a very flat management structure. We just all reported to Nick Peach. Physically on the floor, we had our own little desk space with 2 computers on it. One was completely secure, and that was connected to the Horizon system, and the other one was an open system, for want of a better way of putting it, where we could send emails, look at things on the internet if necessary, that sort of thing.
And so a flat structure, all reporting into Mr. Peach, no hierarchy within the 25 to 30 of you?
No, not that I remember.
Was there any division in terms of specialism amongst you, in terms of the work that was undertaken?
Yeah, some of the guys there have been working with Unix systems since the DOS, so they were, real experts on Unix. So generally, if there was a problem with the server farm, they would pick up those problems. Some of them were very, very good on financial side of things, mathematics and that, so they tended to pick up any work that came on and that sort of thing. Some of us were just sort of generalists who would dive in and do anything we could, and if we got stuck, then we knew who we could perhaps go and ask for a bit of help.
Thank you very much. I want to ask how you came to give evidence and to speak out about the Horizon system. I think it's right that you came forwards after seeing the BBC Inside Out South investigation that was broadcast in, I think, 2011. Is that right?
I can't really remember. There was something I saw or read, and it just triggered some memories, and I just knew that we'd been busily trying to patch systems behind the scenes, and it seemed wrong that, or it might have been wrong that postmasters may have been getting the blame for something that actually wasn't their fault. So I just contacted someone, I'm not sure who, and said I used to work on the systems, and if they wanted to talk to me, I'd be willing to have a chat and explain what we did.
And so what was it that triggered you coming forward? What did you see or read? You mentioned there, I think, postmasters getting the blame. In what way were they getting the blame?
Being sent to prison or prosecuted for things that weren't necessarily their fault. It seemed an injustice.
And so did you essentially become a whistleblower?
Yes, I didn't think of that term at the time until it was mentioned, years later, but yes.
Did you give an interview to Panorama in 2015?
Yes.
And as I've said already, you gave evidence before Mr. Justice Fraser in the group litigation order proceedings over a day and a half on the 13th and 14th of March 2019.
Yes.
Can I ask you to look at your witness statement, please? Paragraphs 7, 8 and 9, which is on page 4 of the witness statement. And I'm going to explore here the nature of the issues that were referred to you in the SSC. Sorry, it's my mistake. Can we have up on the screen poll 302 991? It was my mistake, Mr. Roll. It was paragraph 7, 8 and 9 of this document that's going to come up on the screen for you that I wanted you to look at rather than your inquiry witness statement. This is a copy of the witness statement, if we just scroll up to the top of it. Thank you. Of the witness statement that you made in the High Court proceedings. It's dated the 11th of July 2016. And it's the first of 2 witness statements that you made, okay?
I think I made 3 witness statements.
We've got 2. We'll explore where the third one has gone. Can you see paragraph 7 at the foot of the page? You're introducing the work that you did in the SSC.
Yes.
And you say, by way of example, the type of issue that I would deal with if a financial discrepancy had arisen in a branch, e.g. a shortfall of £5,000, then I would need to work sequentially, over the page please, through all the transactions over the relevant period, and also work through thousands of lines of computer coding. Software programs were written by us to strip out irrelevant data to enable us to more easily locate the error. I just want to ask you some questions about that, please. You say that you would need to look sequentially through all the transactions over the relevant period. And why would you do that? Why would you have to do that?
If there was an error of, I mentioned £5,000 there, but quite often it would be a random number, £4,011 and 27 pence or something. You would need to look at all the transactions to see which one was at fault. If you were lucky, you would find one for that exact value. More often than not, there wasn't one, and it would be sum of several transactions. So you would then be trying to work out which transactions it was that added together came up with that value. If you could easily locate those values and those transactions, you would then need to work out why that error had occurred, what had gone wrong to cause the error.
And so just stopping there, how would you do that first task, looking sequentially through all of the transactions over the relevant period?
You would download the data from the database for that particular post office or counter over the period of perhaps 24 hours.
And how would you look through it?
Sorry, how would you look through it?
Yes. Would you scroll, or would you have something to help you?
It varied. Sometimes you would scroll through the pages. Other times you'd print it all off. Using various text editors and computer languages, we could strip out all the irrelevant text, so that would then just leave the actual product and the values. So then you could see what it was that they were selling. 17 stamps at 49p each or whatever.
And so, sorry, Mr. Roll, to interrupt you, just stopping there, you've moved to the bit at the end of the sentence or the paragraph. Software programs were written by us to strip out irrelevant data. Who's the us in that sentence? Was that the SSC?
Yes,
And just
I wrote some myself.
and so you wrote software that had the purpose of removing irrelevant data lines or data from the data that you were looking at, so that you could try and focus on the discrepancy in issue.
Yes.
Could you give us an example of how such software might strip out irrelevant data?
That's very difficult to explain without demonstrating it, or without showing you what the code looked like. If you're familiar with what HTML code looks like, with the angle brackets and the different tags, you imagine that there are lines and lines of code with that sort of data in it. You may only have, out of 4 lines, sometimes you might only have 1 line that actually had any data that was relevant that you could actually read. So we would write a program that would it would pass the text, the source text, line by line, and if it found any of the relevant tags that we didn't need, it would then skip those, and it would then write the anything that was relevant into a text file, and then that text file would then be a clean text file which we could actually read physically, much more readable in a list. We could do the reverse as well. We could correct data and then, using a program, put all the tags back in to then put it back into a database. Does that explain suitably what I'm talking about?
Yes, it does. Thank you. You say in this paragraph that you would also work through thousands of lines of computer coding. Why would you be looking at the computer coding?
At times we were asked to try and identify, we could perhaps identify where an error had occurred in the data, which lines it was. So then at times we were asked to actually look at the source code for Horizon and try and work out what exactly was going on in the source code caused that problem. We could then give it back to the developers and say, here's the problem, this is the source code, this is the source line, it's wrong. It says here minus this value when it should say plus this value or whatever.
Thank you. What would give you a clue to thinking that there was something wrong with the source code, and therefore you would be examining the source code, the computer coding?
Well, if you were going through the figures and you could see quite plainly that they were maybe selling stock, but one of the stock items, rather than the money coming into the till, had actually been debited from the till, then you'd think, well, why is it doing that? You know, why is the software saying it's been taken out when actually it's come in? So you might have something like that, and that's when you'd be able to go to the code and think, well, okay, where is it? What's going on here?
And so you would track the issue back into the code?
Sometimes, yes.
And in the example that you've given, would that be visible or apparent to the sub-postmaster at all?
Not necessarily. Sometimes the errors might only crop up when the data was actually being processed on the overnight batch processing. From what I remember, I'm a bit hazy around this now.
If we carry on into paragraph 8 of this statement, you say, if there was a single error, then that would be easy to identify. However, there were often multiple errors which would snowball.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to explain a minute ago, where if you've got that one value and that jumps out at you, then it's quite easy to spot. But if you've got several items that are being added incorrectly or whatever, dealt with incorrectly, then it can be very difficult to work out exactly which items or which products were causing the problem.
In that sentence there, are you referring to errors of calculation or errors in the code, or both?
It could be either. Although generally the code caused the errors in the calculation at some point.
And how obvious was a single error in Horizon coding?
Sometimes, from what I remember, quite easy to spot, and other times we couldn't work out what was going on.
You say that there were often multiple errors, and as you've explained, that could mean multiple errors of coding, which would snowball, and that this would make matters more complicated. Sorry, Mr. Roll, yes, do go on.
Multiple errors, it's difficult to say whether it's multiple errors in the coding or just one error that was having multiple effects on the accounts.
When you identified an error in the Horizon coding or some data corruption, could you tell how and when the error had been made?
Sometimes.
What would delineate when you sometimes could and sometimes couldn't?
If it was one of the particular transaction on the counter, so the counter software was at fault, then there would be a timestamp in the database which you could use to give you a time when things have gone wrong. But that's about all I can remember from that.
And would you be able to tell whether it was an error in the original writing of the code or an error which had been introduced by some other coding within Horizon?
No, not necessarily.
Was a primary aim of you and your team not just to identify the error in coding or data corruption, but also to ensure that they were fixed?
Our primary aim was to keep the system up and running so that it worked and so that Fujitsu didn't suffer any penalties. All the transactions had to go through within the 3-day limits. If we could identify problems in the coding as we went along, and that was a bonus.
And so is that why you described it as patching it earlier on?
Sorry, as patching it?
Or patching it up as you went along?
Yes, yeah, we were patching the system as a whole, not necessarily the code.
You mentioned there that you understood that Fujitsu would suffer financial penalties, I think, in the event of delays in processing. Is that right?
Yes.
What was your understanding of those?
It's a long time ago, and I can't remember the figures exactly. My understanding was that if, for instance, a bank transfer didn't go through within 3 days, I think it was, then there would be a financial penalty of, I can't remember this, I think it was, I don't know whether it's 10 pence or £10. It was a smallish financial penalty. The issue arose when you've got 20,000 counters or 20,000 post offices, maybe 40,000 counters, whatever, sending the data through overnight for processing. So then that small financial penalty is multiplied thousands and thousands of times by the number of transactions that are being held up. So then the SLAs that we were trying to meet could have had a substantial effect, maybe tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds in fines that Fujitsu may have had to pay.
And do I understand from what you said a couple of answers ago that you were saying that you understood your primary aim was to get the system up and running and working back on the road so that those financial penalties were either not suffered or were minimised?
Yes.
Rather than necessarily taking a fundamental look at what the underlying or root cause was?
It was widely accepted that the underlying or root cause was that the system was crap. It needed rewriting, but that was never going to happen because the money was not available, the resources were not available to do that. It was being looked at behind the scenes, and a web version was being considered, from what I remember. One of the problems was that the suppliers of the riposte system, from what I remember, they couldn't. It would have been very bad if Fujitsu had told them that we were going to move away from their product, because they were still supporting us and supporting it. So if they'd known the rug was going to be pulled from under their feet, as it were, they may not have been as cooperative as they were.
Was it the case that sometimes, nonetheless, the errors in coding were passed on to the software developers within Fujitsu to fix?
Yes, if we found a definite bug, then we would pass it on to them to fix. We wouldn't fix the bugs ourselves.
And how would the bug be passed on to the software developers to fix?
I can't remember.
Can you remember, in terms of names, any of the software developers that would have these issues passed to them? I realise that we're 2 decades on now.
No, I have a very poor memory for names. I can't remember anything.
You say in paragraph 9 here, we regularly identified issues with the computer coding in the Horizon system. We would flag these issues to the Fujitsu IT software developers. The developers would then work on a fix whilst we monitored the whole estate in relation to that issue. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, you were being asked to look at an issue on the back, essentially, of a sub-postmaster complaint. Is that right?
I was often asked to look at issues because of complaints from sub-postmasters, yes.
But presumably, if a coding error was discovered as a result of the investigation of that complaint or some data corruption, that could potentially have affected hundreds or even thousands of other transactions with other sub-postmasters.
Yes.
Was there any process to identify whether any other transactions were afflicted by the bug that was discovered?
I think so, but I can't remember for definite.
Can you remember whether that was an SSC task or somebody else's task?
It would have been an SSC task.
And so, trying to jog your memory, if I can, a little, would it be part of the SSE's task to put right the consequences of a bug that had been discovered, not just for the sub-postmaster who had raised the issue, but for a wider range of sub-postmasters?
Yes.
Can you remember whether the other sub-postmasters' data that may have been afflicted by this bug were notified of the cause of the discrepancy or error in their own data?
I can't say definitely, but I'm fairly sure that they weren't.
So were they told, there's an error in your data, it's going to be corrected, here's the correction?
That Specifically, sometimes yes, sometimes no.
So sometimes they weren't even told that their data was being corrected. It was corrected without their knowledge.
Yes,
Sometimes they were told that their data was being corrected,
yes,
but your memory is that they weren't told the underlying reasons why it was flawed or affected in the first place, i.e. this is a software bug within Horizon.
that's what I remember, yes.
When you were dealing directly, sorry, this can come down from the screen now, thank you. When you were dealing directly with a sub-postmaster, say the person that had raised the issue, the complaint, did you explain to them that their problem had, on investigation, been found to have had as its root cause a coding error or bug within Horizon?
Quite often we'd identify the problem with the data on the counter. We'd know what was wrong with that, so we'd be able to fix that, but we wouldn't know at that point what had caused it. So if we were talking to the postmaster, we would have just said that we've identified a problem with your counter. There's been some data corruption or something, and we need to fix it. So we need to do this, whatever, to fix the problem. Otherwise, there will be a problem with your accounts.
So it wasn't habitually fed back to them that it was a coding error or multiple coding errors that had caused the underlying problem?
No.
And was there sort of an official line on this as to whether or not you should or shouldn't tell sub-postmasters what the underlying causes of these data errors or corruption were?
I can't remember if there was an official line or not.
But the practice was to not tell them.
Yes.
Can we turn to paragraph 17 of your inquiry witness statement, please? Which is on page 7 at the foot. You say, in my opinion, the coding and development of the system did not meet my expectations of quality for a major software project. I considered it to be a very poor system that should never have been deployed, but I cannot be more specific than this. Does that reflect the epithet that you applied more pithily earlier as to your overall view of the system?
Yes.
Can we turn back, please, to paragraph 11, which is on the previous page? You say, sometimes we were instructed not to let the sub-postmaster know we had altered his system whilst he was logged on. To my recollection, sometimes Pol requested this, sometimes Fujitsu, and sometimes only our department knew of it.
Yeah.
Where did the instruction come from within Fujitsu?
I have no idea.
Who was communicating that instruction to you?
It would have come from the manager, Mick Peach.
And if the instruction came from Pol, did it come directly from Pol to you, or the post office to you, or did it go via Mick Peach?
We got through via Mick Peach.
And so one way or another, instructions not to let the sub-postmaster you had altered their system whilst they were logged on came through Mr. Peach.
Yes.
Can you remember whether there was any discussion in the office at the time about whether it was important to notify the sub-postmaster community more broadly of the finding of a Horizon software error, and that this was causing or could cause discrepancies of data?
I can't remember there ever being any discussion about that. It was, as far as we knew, it was notified through McPeach, through the development teams, and through to Pol. If the chain of management was working correctly, then Pol would have been informed, and then it was down to Pol to inform their managers that there was a problem.
When you were speaking to sub-postmasters, and you said sometimes you would tell them that we've investigated and we found that this is the problem, would you ever say, look, this is an issue we've come across before, don't worry, it's not you, it's the system, we've had a number of reports like this?
We would have. I'm sure that on occasion we said we've seen this before. It'll only take a few minutes to fix, or something along those lines. Yes.
You mentioned earlier your view of the Horizon system. Could we look, please, at poll 302 991? And a look at page 2, please. And look at paragraph 10. This is your first witness statement in the High Court proceedings, Mr. Roll. And in paragraph 10, you say, my recollection is that the software issues we were routinely encountering could and did cause financial discrepancies at branch level, including shortfalls being incorrectly shown on the Horizon system. Just stopping there. You say software issues you were routinely encountering could and did cause financial discrepancies. Can you expand at all or explain what you mean by routinely encountered? Was it a daily occurrence, a weekly occurrence?
I would say my recollection would have been a weekly occurrence within the team.
And was that consistently so over the 3.5 years that you were in the SSC?
There were times when maybe some new software had been released and that would be a bit buggy. So there would be times when we were having multiple issues, and it was very, very busy. At other times, we were able to work on some, would have been a bit quieter, so then we would try to work on other things that had been maybe put on the back burner. But I couldn't really go into any more depth than that. I can't really remember any of the details.
Thank you. Can I just explore so that my understanding of what you are saying is completely accurate? You said that after a new release, the system might become a bit buggy. Do you mean there would be a spike in reports of discrepancies following the release of some new software?
Yes, there might be more reports from the postmasters, or we might find more problems with our monitoring systems that we'd set up to monitor the system to make sure everything was running smoothly. Sometimes the postmasters would not have been aware of the problem. They wouldn't have seen it, but we'd have picked it up, so we'd then fix it. And not necessarily by going into the counters or anything, but just by manipulating the data further along the line.
Looking at the 3.5-year period as a whole and putting aside the peaks and troughs that you've just described, over the course of that 3.5-year period, did the position get any better or worse, or did it just stay the same?
I think it improved as time went on. Standards of coding improved, and of the documentation. But that's a distant memory now, and I can't really remember definitely.
And what was the cause of the improvement in standards of coding?
I just think people were being more professional about it.
And why were they being more professional about it?
I don't know. Maybe, I don't know.
And which people are you talking about? Are you talking about the people in the software development arm?
Yes.
When you joined in early 2001 and over the course of the first year, did you form a view of how reliable the Horizon cash accounts were?
Yes.
And what was your view?
It was pretty ropey. I said to Mick, the manager, at one point, surely this should be rewritten. And his reply was, yes, but it's never going to happen, or something like that. I think I mentioned that before.
And the "it's never going to happen," was that for the reasons that you gave earlier, money and the damage of a relationship between Fujitsu and Riposte?
Money, relationship damage. Also, we just didn't have the staff, which comes down to money again, yes.
You tell us at the end of paragraph 10, if we were unable to find the cause of the discrepancy, then this was reported up the chain, and it was assumed that the postmaster was to blame.
That's my belief, yeah.
Who was it assumed by?
Post office, I believe, and the management of probably Fujitsu.
And do you know how such a decision or how such an assumption was made by them, how they came to assume it?
No.
Do you know who was involved in reaching that view?
No.
But the way you expressed it makes it sound as if it was by a view was reached by default.
That was my feeling. If we couldn't find a problem with the system, if we couldn't work out why there was an error or why there was a problem, then the position, from what I understood, was that if we can't find the problem in the code or in the data, there is no problem. So therefore, if there's no problem with the system, it must be the postmaster.
And did you understand that action was therefore taken against sub-postmasters?
No. At the time we would be looking at this, it could be years later before any action was taken. That's my understanding.
An assumption that it must be action by or wrongdoing by a sub-postmaster doesn't sound like a very strong foundation to take action against them, as opposed to proof positive that they had done something wrong. How comfortable with what was happening did you feel at the time?
At the time, we didn't know any action was going to be taken.
Were you aware that people were being prosecuted?
Not at that time.
in the first year of working, so early 2001 onwards, did you hear that anyone in third line support or indeed fourth line support was asked to be an expert witness in a Horizon prosecution at Kingston Crown Court? I'm referring to the case of Tracy Felsted.
I can't remember. I don't think so.
If we scroll down, please. In paragraph 11, in the first sentence, you tell us that there were over 30 individuals working on the same floor. I've asked you about that already. And that your recollection was that many of those individuals were involved in similar work or other Horizon-related IT work. And then in the last sentence, you say this: I would describe much of the work being carried out as firefighting coding problems in the Horizon system. I just want to understand what you mean by that. I understand firefighting to mean spending time on problems that need to be dealt with quickly instead of working in a calm, ordered and planned way. Is that the sense in which you meant it?
Yes.
What was it like working in such an environment?
It was quite hectic at times. It was sometimes there'd be a bit of a panic on, and it would be all hands on deck to fix the system as quickly as possible. That's all I can say, really.
Thank you. Can we look, please, at the second witness statement you provided in the High Court proceedings, and that's poll 304 225. Thank you. Can you see this is your second witness statement, dated the 16th of January 2009, 19, sorry.
Yes.
And can we go to the fourth page, please? And look at paragraph 12. Here, I think you've been asked to reply to or comment on certain paragraphs in a report produced by the Defendant Post Office, Dr. Robert Warden. And you say in paragraph 12, paragraph 167, Dr. Warden describes software errors being corrected by transaction corrections. And he states, quote, if there were any such software error, it would probably occur with such high frequency and occur uniformly across all branches, giving rise to so many transaction corrections that the Post Office would soon suspect a software error, for instance, seeing the effect repeatedly in some MIS report, and require Fujitsu to correct it. And you say, I do not recall Fujitsu carrying out any analysis of transaction corrections to try to identify if there may be an underlying software error. I also think it's wrong to say that software errors would occur uniformly across branches, as you explained above. My experience was that software errors occurred in very specific factual circumstances, which is why they were challenging to identify and correct. Is what you say there accurate?
Yes, yes, I believe so.
This tends to suggest that in your team there wasn't any underlying analysis any analysis of underlying root causes. Would that be fair?
I'm not sure I can really remember now. If we were getting lots of calls in, then for a specific or very similar problem, within a period of a couple of days, then you'd be very aware of that. and it may have, if that was the case, then sometimes we would have been probably aware of that and worked on a fix before Pol were even aware of it.
I'm more getting to the issue of whether the post office came to you and said, we suspect a software error. Can you conduct, I don't know, some meta-analysis of the system to see whether our suspicion is correct?
I don't think the post office ever came to us to say that. I can't remember for sure, but I'm pretty certain they didn't.
Thank you. That can come down now. Thank you. Were you aware of a team called the Customer Service Security Team?
I don't remember that phraseology, no.
Can you recall, remember somebody called Andrew or Andy Dunks?
No.
Can you recall a job title or a role being undertaken of the cryptographic key manager?
There was a key, which was a crypto key, if you like, which was generated by a secure PC in a locked room within the SSC. Bearing in mind that the SSC itself was on the 6th floor of a very secure building behind double doors that were extremely secure. It was a very, very secure area, but that's about all I can remember.
Mr. Dunks was the manager of the cryptographic key. We've heard from him recently. I think it follows from what you said that you didn't have any, or you don't recall any liaison with him or the security team.
No.
We know that he, the cryptographic key manager, was selected to give evidence by provision of witness statements and giving oral evidence in court about what you and your team in the SSC had done in response to calls to the SSC and the work that your team had undertaken as recorded on call logs. Do you understand?
Right.
Do you know why one of that team, the customer service team, and in particular the person that managed the cryptographic key, was selected to give evidence about what you and your team were doing in the SSC?
No.
Were you ever party to a discussion, or did you ever hear about why somebody who managed the cryptographic key would give evidence about what some other people were doing rather than you or somebody in your team giving evidence?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes. Did you ever hear any discussion, or whether you were any party to a discussion, about why Mr. Dunks, the crypto key manager, was giving evidence about what was or wasn't shown on help desk call logs that were completed by you and members of your team, rather than a member of you and your team giving evidence?
No.
Did anyone ever ask you to give evidence about what you did in response to any calls or raising of concern about data errors or discrepancies?
I don't think so.
If they had have done so, would you have described all of the issues and the problems that we are discussing here today?
Probably, yes.
Did you ever hear any discussion about who from Fujitsu should attend court to give evidence about the operation of the Horizon system?
I don't recall ever hearing anything about that, no.
In your time, did you know whether anyone from Fujitsu was to attend or had attended court giving evidence about the operation of the Horizon system?
I can't remember that happening.
Thank you. Can I turn to some hardware issues, please? And can we have up, please, poll 302-991? This is your first witness statement in the High Court proceedings again. And if we turn to the third page, please, and look at paragraph 14 at the top, you say, as well as software issues, I can also recall that there were regular IT hardware issues at branch level. However, I would reiterate that the main recurring issues were software issues. Could hardware issues affect the integrity of the data recorded or produced by Horizon?
Yes.
What hardware issues would typically affect the integrity of the data recorded or produced by Horizon?
If the database on one of the counters became corrupted, then it could stop that counter communicating with the rest of the system, which would lead then to transactions being marooned on that counter. Depending on what the problem on the counter was, it may have been a fairly quick fix where we could just fix it on the counter itself. Or it may have been that we had to get the counter back into Bracknell, where one of the guys would hack into it and retrieve the data. Sometimes if the counter was beyond recovery, then transactions could be lost. So bills that have been paid may not have been gone through, or whatever money that had been paid to the post office might not have been recorded properly.
Thank you. That can come down. Can we look, please, at poll 304-225? This is your second witness statement. And can we go to page 2, please, and look at paragraph 5 under the heading hardware failures. You say Dr. Warden refers, and you remember what you're doing in this statement. Dr. Warden refers at paragraph 151 of his report to hardware failures. He says, although the hardware in the branches was not always reliable and communications infrastructure at that time were not highly reliable, there were strong measures built into Old Horizon to ensure that hardware failures and communication failures could not adversely affect branch accounts. And you say, during my time at Fujitsu, we frequently encountered hardware failures which had occurred in branches and required our intervention to attempt to remedy the problem. I would estimate I was involved with a hardware failure on average at least once a month. These problems could and did affect branch accounts. Is that correct?
Yes.
Paragraph 6, you say the most extreme case that I can recall was a complete failure of a counter to communicate with the server, which required the counter to be removed to the SSC so the data could be recovered and a replacement counter installed in the sub-post office. Prior to the problem being identified, data could be backing up on the counter without it being replicated to other counters or to the correspondent server. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that what you were alluding to a moment ago?
Yes, I can definitely remember one where we had it, more than one where they were brought back for the data to be recovered, and then put back into the system later. I can't for 100% recall whether we had one where we couldn't recover all the transactions, but I'm fairly sure we did have one where we didn't
And then
recover
skip.
everything.
I'm sorry, I missed what you said at the end there.
I'm fairly sure there was one or more occasions where we couldn't recover all the data, but I can't say that for certain.
Can we skip to paragraph H, please? You say, I recall one particular case where branch data was not being replicated from a mobile post office correctly, and it appeared that the sub-post mistress was turning off the power mid-transaction. As we could not fix this problem over the phone with the sub-post mistress, she sent the laptop to Fujitsu for examination. Using the post office test rigs on the 6th floor and comparing the results with the laptop that had been returned to Fujitsu, I discovered that the button which should have put the laptop into standby mode was actually switching off the power, resulting in the disk crashing. I disassembled the laptop to confirm this. Thus, when the post mistress thought she was switching her counter to standby mode, which would have initiated a controlled shutdown and allowed the data store to replicate the servers, she was actually switching the power off, which is what we were seeing in the SSC. When I raised this with my manager, Mick Peach, who subsequently talked to the hardware team, I found that this was a known problem. One of the engineers had made a mistake with a batch of laptops which had been sent out to branches before the error was detected. No one outside the team responsible for building the laptops had been informed of this, which meant that I had spent several days investigating the problem. Whereas the sub-post mistress in this case was provided with a laptop, knowledge of this problem was kept within the department's concern, and the batch of faulty laptops was not recalled. It's my belief that Fujitsu senior management and post office were not informed. Is that all correct?
Yeah.
When you're referring to Fujitsu senior management not being informed, who are you referring to? What level?
Well, my manager knew Mick Peach. His friend who ran the build team knew. Whether Mick ever told his manager, I don't know. As far as I'm aware, it never got up the chain beyond that. I was told to basically hush it up.
Why were you? What words were used to tell you basically to hush it up?
I can't remember exactly, but it had been dealt with.
And who told you basically to hush it up?
Mick.
In an answer, a couple of answers ago, you say you don't know whether it went any further. Here you say it's your belief that it didn't go any further, that Fujitsu senior management were not informed. What was that belief based on?
The way I was asked to close the call, and the fact that I can't remember exactly. It's just that the way I was told to deal with the call and to get rid of it.
Was that the only time that that kind of thing was said to you? Was this an isolated example? So keep it within the team, or did that happen on more than one occasion?
That is the only one that really sticks in my memory. I can't remember if it happened on more than one occasion.
Thank you. So it's 1:15 now. I wonder whether that might be an appropriate time for the morning break.
Yes, certainly. 11:30, all right, Mr. Beer?
Yes, thank you very much.
All right, see you again at 11:30, Mr. Rowe.
Thank you.
So good morning. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, thank you.
And can you, Mr. Roll?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we turn up a document, please, with the URN Fujitsu 0008 6267? You'll see from from the bottom right of the document that this is dated 2011, so post-dated by many years at the time of your leaving Fujitsu. And if you scroll to the top, please, you'll see under the abstract that it concerns HNGX, Horizon Online, of which you were not a part. Correct?
Correct.
But I want to ask you about whether something within the document replicates the position when you were working for that 3.5-year period for Fujitsu. Can we turn, please, to page 15? And look down to paragraph 2.7. Removal of duplication. If we just read it together, all support groups should ensure that they do not pass to the right duplicate incidents, i.e. incidents which are repetitions of an incident which has already been passed to the next line of support. They should either retain the duplicate incidents within their own call logging system or close them as duplicates. First line units retain duplicates under a master call, and to ensure that when the incident resolved is received from second line, the end user is contacted and duplicated call incidents closed within TFS. Second to fourth line support units normally immediately close the incidents as duplicates because they add no value to the support process at these levels. This results in the incidents being returned to first line. Duplicate incidents are only acceptable where the symptoms reported by the customer did not match the symptoms recorded in the original incident and which therefore could not reasonably have been identified as a duplicate. Failures will be reflected in filtration figures where the incidents are closed in the duplicate incident category in peak by subsequent support units. Does that reflect the working practice of the SSC at the time that you were in post?
I can't remember.
Can you remember any instructions on the treatment of duplicate incidents?
No.
Can you remember any instruction, custom or practice, the effect of which was to minimise or seek to minimise the reporting of duplicate incidents, and that they would be regarded as a black mark against the support team concerned?
Not sure. I think they may have been returned to first line support because we were already looking at, but I can't remember for sure.
Okay, I understand. Do you remember, that can come down now, thank you. Do you remember Anne Chambers?
I remember the name, but I wouldn't recognise her. Don't know what. I only remember the name because the name's come up recently.
Do you remember that person, even though you wouldn't recognise her, as a person who worked in your time at the SSC?
Yes.
Can you recall whether she had any particular expertise?
I think she was very good on the accounting side, she was, I think, very experienced in going through the databases, but I can't remember really.
Did she, to your knowledge, have any expertise in the integrity of the software on Horizon?
I can't remember.
Or on the integrity of Horizon data?
I can't remember.
In your time, noting the time at which you left, did you have any conversations with her about a requirement for her to give evidence in any court proceedings?
No, not that I remember.
In your time, can you recall whether she was selected to give evidence in any court proceedings?
No, I don't remember. I don't recall anybody being selected, but from what you said, they were, but I have no recollection of it.
Can we look, please, at poll 307 3280? This is an exhibit sheet, so it's like a front sheet of an exhibit produced by Mr. Dunks, Andrew Dunks, who I mentioned earlier, and in it is a selection of call logs produced by Mr. Dunks for the purposes of some civil proceedings that the Post Office took against a man called Lee Castleton. Can we turn to one of those call logs, please? It starts on page 20. And just if we can expand it out so you can look at the whole of the first page of it. Do you recognise the format of this call log?
No.
At the time, did you ever look at call logs in printed format, or would they appear on the screen to you?
I think they were always on the screen.
You'll see, and bearing in mind that you wouldn't have seen it in this format, if we look at the top, we can see that the call was opened on the 25th of February 2004. Can you see that?
Yeah.
In the middle at the top. And so that's within your time working on the SSC.
Yeah.
And can you see in about 10 boxes below under problem text, it says PM, which I think is postmaster reporting that they are getting large discrepancies for the last few weeks.
Yeah.
Yes? And just so you know, this call relates to difficulties that Lee Castleton was having at his branch. And I just want to run through this call log, please, to see whether you can help us with what some of the text means and what was done in relation to it. So if we scroll down, please, to call activity log, which is right at the foot of the page at the moment. And again, you wouldn't have seen these entries in this way. They would be on a screen, is that right, for you? And not set out in this format?
I can't remember. I don't know if we'd seen all of this data or not. I can't remember.
Let's just go through it and see whether looking at it in a bit more detail and slowly helps you. Do you see the first entry open? New call taken by Kuljinder Bachu. This is on the 25th of February 2004. Postmaster reporting that they are getting large discrepancies for the last few weeks. And that's what we read above.
Yeah.
And is that the way that the SSE would operate, by putting a pithy summary of the text within an entry like that?
I can't remember.
Okay. Moving to the next line, also on the 25th of February, looking at closed calls for this site, there have been a number of calls logged regarding discrepancies. NBSC have been in contact with the postmaster and cannot find any user error. Can you now remember what NBSC was?
No.
Okay. The next line, also later that day, spoke to Sandra and NBSC regarding this issue. Checked Tivoli events and health checked. Site is health checking okay. Can you now remember what Tivoli was?
I think that was a software program that ran in the background and monitored events and set alerts if it detected anything Any errors?
Next entry, critical event scene at, and the time is given, on the 18th of February, stating error message, an error has occurred, see the audit log. The next entry, later still that day, KEL reference. Can you remember now what KELs were?
Yeah, that was the known error log. That's about all I remember of it.
Can you remember what the known error log was?
A log of known errors.
Yes. Who was it maintained by?
I can't remember.
Was it maintained by the SSC?
I can't remember.
Next entry, later still, downloading event logs for progression and some numbers, application, system, and security. Next entry, a little later still, previous history in calls, and then some references are given. Next entry, spoke to the postmaster, who advises that the problem with the CA, do you remember what CA was?
I think it's cash account.
Started ever since the BT engineer came to move the BT box for the preparation for the installation of ADSL.
Yeah.
Next entry, later still, usernames are given, other BAL users, stock unit, AA balance on Wednesday after 5:30. Does this mean anything to you so far?
Not really. You've got two. CTR 001 is just a username. So that's all I could say from that.
And then this, could SSC please investigate why this post office is experiencing large discrepancies ever since the BT engineer has moved BT box in preparation for ADSL installation? KEL reference given as possible problem. MBSC have said there is no user error. Would you understand that last entry to mean that it's not the sub-postmaster that's doing anything wrong, say NBSC?
Yes.
Then skipping to the foot of the page, bar one entry, an entry by Barbara Longley, incident under investigation, pre-scan, assigning call to Anne Chambers in EDSC. Can you recall what EDSC was?
No.
Can we go over the page, please? An entry by Anne Chambers on the 26th. Incident under investigation. KEL quoted is irrelevant. If the audit log had been checked, it would have shown a different error message. The event was part of a storm which occurred over the estate that night as a result of a faulty software fix and has nothing to do with the discrepancies. Can you help us with what a storm occurring over the estate might refer to?
I think it refers to a whole load of errors that were generated. But I must admit I'm guessing now, I can't remember.
Okay. The next entry, no transaction date and time was provided for this action using current date and time. And then an entry by Anne Chambers, advice and guidance given. I have checked various things on the system. All the internal reconciliation checks are okay. Checks are being handled correctly, except for 10th of February, when the clerk forgot to cut off the report. But this didn't cause a discrepancy. Cash declarations look okay. They usually use drawer ID 11. Occasionally they've used a different drawer ID. This can lead to amounts apparently doubling on the cash flow report and should be avoided. But again, it will not cause a discrepancy. Checking the cash transactions on the system against the declarations shows that they're not working particularly accurately. At the end of the day, the cash they declare in the drawer is tens, hundreds or thousands of pounds astray from what has been recorded on the system. It is possible they're not accurately recording all transactions on the system. There's no evidence whatsoever of any system problem. I've mentioned this outlet to Julie Welsh Customer Services, who will try to get Pole to follow it up. But in the meantime, please tell the postmaster we've investigated and the discrepancies are caused by the difference between the transaction they have recorded on the system and the cash they've declared, and are not being caused by software or hardware. And then there's some entries that don't concern us. Can you tell what Anne Chambers has done from these records in order to reach these conclusions?
No.
What would typically you do when presented with the problem that Anne Chambers was presented with? What investigative steps would you undertake?
There's not a lot of information in the call log. For me to give you much of an answer for that. I don't think there was any specific figures given. I can't remember what I'd have done in this situation.
Can you remember a species of data called ARQ data?
No.
Can you help us, and given the answers to the questions I've asked so far, I think it might be limited the help you can give us, how a KEL would be used to investigate a call like this?
I'm trying to remember. The KEL would have information about what the symptoms of the problem were. Give you pointers as to what was causing the problem. So then you could go into the system and look for those particular traits, if you like, to confirm that that was the problem. And it would then give you the details of the fix, which you could then apply to rectify the problem. So if they provided a KEL there, but then when you looked at it, all the audit log data or whatever, event logs, etc., didn't have the relevant information in or different information in them, then that KEL wouldn't apply. So that would then not be the KEL that was relevant. In that case, you're then sort of working blind. You've got to try and work out from what the postmaster's saying where there is a problem. So you'd be working on that, going through the systems, the accounts, etc., trying to find out if there was a problem with the counters or with the software, where it was, working blind largely, and then just, that's all I can really say. You'd have 3 days to find the fault, and then you'd have to hand it back.
We can see that here the help desk put up a KEL number, and Anne Chambers looked at that KEL and found that it wasn't relevant. Was there a way of searching the KELs to look for a fault or problem that was similar to the one that you were being asked to investigate? Because in this case, she's ruled out that KEL as being applicable. Was there a way of, I'm imagining a keyword search or free text search, or way into the KELs to look at whether the problem that you were being asked to look at was indeed a known error?
I can't remember.
Okay, thank you. Can that come down now, please? Can we look at an Excel spreadsheet document? It's poll 3028922. Thank you. And we're looking at tab 5, and it's called Finals Count. And the heading of this is Total Peaks Resolved by You between the 21st of March 2011 and the 17th of September 2004. That roughly accords with the period of time that you spent in the SSC, doesn't it?
Approximately, yes.
And do you know the provenance of a document like this?
No. I imagine that Fujitsu have provided it, and it will show some of the work that I did while I was there.
And it appears to be a record of result codes and a total of them on the right-hand side attributed to you. I just want to ask for your help, please, in whether you can remember what any of the result codes are, or more particularly, the kind of problems and the resolutions of them that might occur. So do you see the first one is ref data fix release to call logger?
That's a reference data fix. Sometimes the reference data was corrupt or incorrect, and so we'd have to send out a fix. The reference data, that's the reference data being all the information regarding, for instance, stamps or fishing licenses or gas companies, utility companies, that sort of thing.
So the cost of items supplied by third-party suppliers that the post office administered, essentially.
Costs, yeah, or maybe a bank account. No, that's probably a bad one. But address details or some, yeah, just not just costs, but product details fully. Everything to do with the product.
Thank you. And a reference data fix, what would that involve?
I can't remember. One of the teams would have to rewrite the database that held all the data and then redistribute it to the estate or to the relevant post offices.
And why might the reference data be wrong or require fixing?
Somebody keyed it in wrong.
The next one underneath, SW fix release to call logger.
That's software fix.
And what would that refer to? Which software and where?
I'm not sure. There were so many areas of software, not just the riposte system that the counters were running in that. I can't remember the full details.
But software within the Horizon system?
Somewhere within the system, yes.
The third of them, build fix release to call logger. What would a build fix be?
I think that relates to the NT software that was running on the counters. So you had the basic counter, which had NT installed on it, but it was very, so that's Windows NT. It was a very doctored system, so that then the riposte system sat on top of the NT system. And on top of riposte, from what I remember, there was the Horizon system. So the build fix, I think, referred to the NT, which is the basic box. If there'd been a software upgrade to the Windows software, and maybe hadn't got through to that particular counter, that could then cause a problem later when newer software, newer Horizon software was downloaded, if that relied upon Windows being up to date, but Windows wasn't up to date on that counter, that could have caused a problem.
Thank you. No fault in product. That may appear self-explanatory, and at the risk of getting that kind of response from you again, can I just check that what that does in fact refer to?
It means basically that in the time we were allowed, we couldn't find a problem.
And the product is what in that sentence?
Anything within the Horizon system. So it could be at the back end where it's processing overnight. It could be on the counters. As I say, it doesn't mean there wasn't a fault. It just meant that we couldn't find it.
You said in the time that we were allowed, was there a sort of a hard deadline on the amount of time that you were permitted to devote to investigation?
From my recollection, we were allowed 3 days.
The next one, published known error. Can I ask, who would the published refer to? Published to whom?
That was, from what I remember, it was an error that had been confirmed, and it had been, the details had been promulgated to the first and second line with a fix or with an explanation, whatever, so that it should never have been sent to third line for investigation because it had already been investigated and the problems found. So it should have been dealt with at first or second line.
And then an unpublished known error. Why might some known errors be unpublished?
I can't remember.
Can you try and think back?
I can't remember.
Solicited known error.
Yeah.
To what did that refer?
I can't remember what that was.
Administrative response, which seems to be one of the higher numbers. What was an administrative response?
That was a general catch-all. If you couldn't work out which one it should go in, then sometimes you just chuck it down as an administrative response. That's what I think it was.
And when you say chuck it down, you would apply a result code.
Yeah, you had
Of, in this case, 70, I think it is, to that.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. There were certain areas where it wasn't clear which one you should put it in. So that was, yeah, I think that was the sort of catch-all.
Avoidance actions supplied. Arising from that, and it's a two-parter. Firstly, what is avoidance action? And secondly, to whom would it be supplied?
It would be supplied to the estate. So that could be to the servers. This is, I'm not 100% certain about any of these, but this is what I seem to remember. So from what I recall, this could be applied to the servers overnight. So if the servers fell over in the processing, the way when I was there this worked was that at about 6 o'clock every evening, all the counters would start uploading their data to the main servers, wherever they were. They would be given a few hours to transfer all the data, and then it would all be batch processed. So there were Unix programs and batch files that would run. So they would sort the data into, American Express transactions and Barclays Bank transactions and all this sort of thing. Then 20 minutes, that would be given 20 minutes to run. Then there would be another maybe half an hour or an hour where it would add up all the figures for American Express, and they would do the same for Barclays, etc. Then another process would then run, and it would send all the data out to another database. Then the next night, because this would take a long time, processes would run to further refine this data before it was transmitted out to the banks and to the American Express systems, etc. So on the servers, if one of those processes fell over, if you could get in quickly enough and restart it, then it would carry on running that night. Otherwise, if you missed the window, you had to rerun it the next night, which would then cause a bit of a backlog. But if you were able to do that, that would then be avoidance action because you got it started again and avoided any sort of action. If it was on the counter, it could be that there'd been a database corruption and you had to go in, extract the data, fix the corruption, put the data back onto the platform so that then the system could carry on running correctly. Again, that would be avoidance action.
Thank you. Duplicate call, is that self-explanatory?
Yes, yeah.
And that means what? A call from two different sub-postmasters or the same call twice, from the same sub-postmaster twice?
I think it could be either. I'm not 100% certain now.
Fixed at future release, to what does that refer?
I think that was when there'd been a problem on the counter. Postmaster had phoned it in, we'd investigated, found it was a known problem, and that there was a fix that had been written, but because of the amount of data traffic on the lines, we didn't have time to actually, there hadn't been time yet to put that fix onto the counters. So it was all ready to go, but it just hadn't been released yet.
Reconciliation resolved. To what does that refer?
I can't remember. It's something to do with the accounting, but I can't remember exactly.
Suspected hardware fault, that is self-explanatory.
Yeah.
Advice and guidance given. What kind of advice and guidance might be given so as to result in this result code?
Maybe it was a training issue, or a postmaster was doing something in the wrong order, so that figures weren't adding up properly. In the previous examples of that, Kel, you mentioned that there was a stock code. Sometimes the postmaster was using the wrong drawer, and that was causing issues. So that would be the sort of advice that was given, don't do this because it will cause a problem. Other things would be that, don't turn the computer off before 6 o'clock, because if you do that, it may not transmit all the data, all that sort of thing.
Insufficient evidence. Insufficient evidence to do what?
To actually find out what the, to even know where to start looking for a problem.
User error. User, does that refer to the sub-postmaster or counter clerk?
Either, yes.
Route to CFM. Can you remember what that was?
I can't remember what that is.
You'll see that the total that's attributed on this spreadsheet to the peaks resolved by you in that 3.5-year period was 915, so 275, 300 a year. Does that accord with your recollection of the work that you would have got through?
I can't really remember. Quite often you'd work on other, it's not a terribly accurate way of doing things, unfortunately. Sometimes 3 or 4 of you would be working on a call, but only one would actually be recording on it. Other times you might be allocated a call. You might be working on 3 or 4 at a time, so maybe you'd pass 1 or 2 on to somebody else. So then they would be given as the person who'd closed it.
So you're warning us not to take too much from this. All this is a record of is where you enter the result code.
Yes.
Thank you very much. That can come down now. Can we turn to the issue of remote access, please? And can we start, please, by looking at paragraph 9 of your inquiry witness statement? WITN 00780100. And it's page 5. And just scroll down so we get paragraph 9, please. Thank you. And starting from the third line of your inquiry witness statement, you say, apart from responding to requests for assistance from second line, for example, looking into issues reported by sub-postmasters regarding accounting, product errors, hardware failures, etc., or queries from utility companies regarding payments made at post offices that hadn't gone through, we also monitored the system and ran remote programs we had developed which provided advance warning of any failures, for example, with the overnight batch processing of network banking transactions or benefits payments. And then this sometimes meant we had to connect remotely to the sub-postmasters' Horizon terminals, sometimes without their knowledge or consent, to make changes to the counter configuration or the database system. Can I just check, Mr. Roll, please? By that last sentence there, are you suggesting that the changes would result or could result in an alteration to branch data that could affect branch accounts?
Yes.
Why would, if you can remember, if you can help us, making a change to the counter configuration do that?
The main one I remember is that if the database had become corrupt, if one of the transactions hadn't been recorded correctly, then although the postmaster would continue to work and everything on the post office side of things, post on the counter, would seem to be working correctly, in effect, the system would be writing data into the database, but none of that data would then be copied across to other counters or up to the servers where it would be processed. So from that side of things, there could be a discrepancy because the postmaster would be working on the counter and yet the systems further up the line wouldn't know he'd done any work on it because the corruption would have prevented that data from being read. We could then go in into the counter and basically just correct it so that things would work properly, and then the data then would be harvested. However, to do that, we had to take all the data off the counter from the point of the corruption, save it all, correct the line of code which had been corrupted, and then put all of the data we'd taken off back in. If during the correction of that line of code we'd got something wrong, we could have potentially caused a problem. Or if, whilst we'd been removing the data and then putting it back in, that the data that the postmaster had continued to enter, if we'd made a mistake with that or accidentally deleted a line or anything, then again, there could have been a problem there. So the other problem that could have happened is that if the postmaster hadn't been aware that we were doing it and had continued to use the system or accidentally used the system, then we would have overwritten his data, which then would have caused problems with the cash balancing or whatever. You may have had more money or less money in the till than than the system was showing because we'd effectively deleted his transactions.
Thank you. Could we just look, please, at poll 404074? Thank you. This is a transcript of the evidence you gave in the High Court proceedings. And I'm afraid, Mr. Old, this is going to be a bit fiddly, so please bear with me because I'm going to be asking you about some of the answers that you gave previously, all right? Can we look, please, at page 34 of this document? And look at the bottom left-hand quadrant, which has got the internal pagination 130. And can we pick it up from line 21, please? And here you're being asked questions by the Post Office's barrister, or one of them. And he says, quoting from your witness statement, "Still, on the subject of remote access to branch systems, as I recall, some errors were corrected remotely without the sub-postmaster being aware." And he says, "Those errors are not errors, or rather those corrections were not corrections which changed branch." And then if we go to the top of the next page, which is top right-hand side, that's it. The sentence was, "which changed branched accounts in the way we discussed." And you answered no. You're talking about other errors, aren't you? Yes. Question, could you give some examples of the kind of errors you are talking about? Answer, I can't remember, I'm afraid. And then he says, but it would be things like changing configuration items. And you said, probably yes. And he said, that sort of thing, which would not have an impact on the branch accounts in the way we have previously discussed. And you said, I think so, yes. That exchange there, and it may be difficult to piece together the effect of your evidence from the questions and answers. But were you saying there that changes to counter configuration would not have an impact on branch accounts?
I can't remember exactly now. And I couldn't definitely say that a change in the configuration would or wouldn't have an effect. I just can't remember that much information.
But that's very fair. Thank you very much. Can we look then to that can come down. The different routes that might be taken to remote access. And can we have back up the 5th page of your inquiry witness statement? Page 5. At the foot of the page, paragraph 10. And if you just look, you say, I think there are several ways to connect to the counters, but it was a long time ago and I can't remember the exact details, as I recall. And then you say A, and then if we go over the page, there's a B and a C. So there's 3 ways that you recall, it being a long time ago and without you remembering exact details, ways to connect to the counters. And I'm just going to go through each of those 3 ways, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
The first way, A, if we just go back, please, thank you. We could log into the Horizon servers using our own login details and then use the Riposte system to access the counters. Any changes we made to the counter database would then have our login details attached. So in that way, you were using your own login details, you were going through the Riposte system to get into the counters, and therefore any changes would have your login details against them. Is that right?
Yes, in the database, from what I recall, if the postmaster was doing transactions, he would be logging, for example, as CTR001. So every line of code in the database would start with CTR001 to identify that postmaster. If we logged in through Riposte through this way, in my example, it may be my code was RWR001. So any transactions or changes I made would start in the database with RWR001. So anybody coming along later would see straight away that it wasn't CTR, it was RWR who'd made the changes or put the data in.
So there'd be a record, an audit trail, as it were, of your actions and what you had done.
Yes.
And so to that extent, it's visible and would be apparent to somebody looking at after the event over who made a relevant entry.
Yes. The problem with that way of doing things was that the way the system worked, it would, if it was then harvesting transactions, it would be looking through and seeing everyone was CTR001. As soon as it came to one that said RWR001, it wouldn't recognize it and there would be errors, or it may not process it. It might be that it just skipped them and carried on with the rest of it and didn't flag an error. So then there could be, if we tried to correct an accounting error or something with the system, it might be that the error wasn't correct at all and it just skipped it.
And so although you might be able to log in and use this route into the system, you might be able to make a correction. By making the correction, the fix, you were creating one that was either ineffective or could cause other problems.
Yes.
Did you use that method much then?
At times it was, at times that certainly, when we knew it wouldn't cause a problem, we would use it. More for when we were doing things, I think, on the actual, either on the routers or the servers themselves and not the counters.
And why on the routers and servers rather than counters?
If we were needed, I can't remember exactly, but sometimes you could change the data as it came into the system, or while it was as it came into the servers, or while it was already on the servers. In that way, you didn't need to go into the counters at the post office to change it.
Thank you. Can we turn to the second way that you describe in your little b? We could log in through Riposte another way. I can't remember the details, in which case it would be difficult to see who had made changes.
Yeah, there was a way of logging in and it wouldn't have a user ID. This is my recollection. It's not necessarily 100% accurate. But from what I remember, then instead of having CTR001 or RWR001, that area would be blank. Again, that would then probably cause processing issues at some point later on, or it may not, depending on which bit of data was being changed.
And why might you use this way?
I can't remember. I know that it was possible to do it, but I can't remember why it would be done. Maybe it was to change actual parameters and not actual data, reference data parameters or something. I can't remember.
Again, can we just look back at when you were asked questions on what might be the same topic? I just want to check that they are in your answers given in the group litigation order trial. So can we have up again poll 40's 4074? And go to page 30, please. And go to the bottom right-hand quadrant of the page, which should be internal pagination 116. And can we pick it up, please, at line 22? This is again the Post Office's barrister cross-examining you. And he says, and the second sentence, and just so that you've got some context here, he's putting part of Mr. Godseth's witness statement to you, okay? He's reading it to you, Mr. Godseth's witness statement. And he says, and the second sentence, the Riposte product managed the message store and it did not allow any message to be updated or deleted, although it did allow for data to be archived once it, and then over the page please, had reached a sufficient age. And you say yes. He asks, question, it is correct, isn't it, that Riposte didn't allow any transaction line in the message store to be individually deleted or changed or edited in any way? And you replied, you couldn't do it through Riposte, no. You had to hack the system to do it. And just stopping there, what did you mean by you had to hack the system to do it?
There was another way of running Riposte from, now I can't remember whether it was our counters or from the server, where you could create a session in Riposte, I think it was. Then you could use Riposte to insert data, but then that restricted very much what you could do. So what we were doing, going through the A and B I've just described, was effectively hacking the system. What they're talking about here is using Riposte to do the stuff for you directly, and actually opening up a Riposte session, as it were. So it's like using Microsoft Word or a text editor. But you can either use Microsoft Word to edit a nice document, or you could open it up in a text editor if you knew what you're doing, and do it, through the back door, as it were. We were doing it through the back door.
And
I don't know if
why are you describing it as a hack?
because it wasn't the way things were supposed to be done. I don't think it was anyway.
Why was it being done in a way that wasn't supposed to be done?
Because that was the only way we could get the system back up and running. It was a workaround.
Was it just you doing it, or were other people in the SSE doing it?
Everybody was doing it.
Was it common? I'm sorry, I missed your answer there.
Yeah, we had unrestricted access. Basically, we could do whatever we wanted. So everybody did it when we had to.
Was this known about by your deputy manager of the SSE and the manager of the SSE?
Oh, definitely, yes.
How would they know that everyone in the SSE were doing it?
Well, it was the other members of the SSE who taught me how to do it. That was the accepted way of doing it in some instances.
Was it reduced to writing, this hack?
Sorry?
Was it reduced to writing? Was it written down anywhere that this is the way you do it?
I don't know. I know that from things I've read that there were problems later when the auditors came in and found out we were doing it. So quite possibly, I mean, to start with, I don't think anything was written down. It was all very much flying it by the seat of your pants, as it were. Things got written down internally as we went along, and then gradually the documentation built up from that. That was one of the problems with the system to start with, that there was no documentation. It was all a scratch, it was all scratched together sort of thing. It was a mess.
Can we leave this transcript for the moment? I'm afraid we're going to come back to it in a second and pick up the rest of what you said. and go to what I think you might be referring to when you said that it was picked up. Can we turn up Fujitsu 0008 8036? Can you see that this is a document dated August 2002? So it's about halfway or so through your time in the SSC.
Yeah.
It's described as secure support system outline design. You're not listed as a contributor or a reviewer, nor a person to whom the document would in due course be distributed. But I just want to ask you a question about a passage in it to see whether it reflects your experience in the SSC. Can we turn to page 15, please? And it's under paragraph 4.3.2, third line and operational support. It reads, all support access to the Horizon systems is from physically secure sites. Individuals involved in the support process undergo more frequent security vetting checks. Other than the above, controls are vested in manual procedures requiring managerial sign-off, controlling access to post office counters where update of data is required. Otherwise, third line support has, the first bullet point, unrestricted and unaudited privileged access, system admin, to all systems, including post office counter PCs. Is that what you were referring to?
Yes.
Is it true that the third line support had unrestricted and unaudited privileged access to all systems, including sub-postmasters, counter PCs?
Yes.
Was that widely known within the SSC?
Within the SSC, yes.
Was it known to your knowledge outside the SSC?
No.
Plainly, by the time of this document, it was.
Yeah, by this time it must have been, but I wouldn't think widely known. I wouldn't think Post Office would have been probably aware of it.
Why wouldn't you think Post Office would be aware of it?
Well, as the customer, I think they would be, or they should have been, very concerned if they were aware that we had that sort of access. At the time I was working there, I just accepted that this was, the practice. It's only since then that I've come to realise that actually it's pretty shocking the amount of access we did have.
Can we go back then to the transcript? Poll 404074, page 30. In fact, we've gone on to page 31. Breaking off as we had just after your answer about the hack, you said you couldn't do it through riposte. No, you had to hack the system to do it. And then the Post Office's barrister asked you, so would this be right then, that it wouldn't be possible to remotely access a counter and change the data on the message store of that counter remotely? And you said, I believe theoretically it would. And he asked, how would that be possible? Riposte wouldn't allow you to do it, would it? And you say, by doing the system that I have just said, if you could, without the message store replicating, so there's no other copies of it, if you could get that message store off, alter the data in some of the lines of code, to do that, you'd need to strip out all of the preamble and the postamble. So you're then just left with the basic data as if it's been on the stack or whatever. Forgive me, I'm very rusty on this. But then by, I think it was the riposte import, but it might have been something else, you could then re-inject that data, which is the process we would have used to rebuild a counter. But if you had changed some of that, and then down a page, data, I think it would have rewritten the CRC when it imported it so that when it replicated, the data could theoretically have been changed. Council says, I'm finding it difficult to follow you, and it may be my fault. The judge says, I follow what the witness is saying, but just keep exploring it. And the Post Office barrister said, I would like to distinguish, though, between transactions insertions, the process of injecting particular transactions into the message store, which could be done, with the process of actually manually changing a transaction line that is in the message store. And you could insert new transactions, couldn't you? But what you couldn't do is you couldn't edit or indeed individually delete lines that were in the message store itself. You answered, you'd have to delete all of the message, from what I remember. Delete all of the messages down to a certain point to the one you wanted to amend, and then inject a load more text or insert more transactions in to make the message store and Riposte think it had been put in by Riposte and by the postmaster. And that's where your answer ended. Is what you are describing in that big answer at the on the page above, between lines 14, if we just scroll up, lines 14 on the first page, down to line 3 on the second page, and then scrolling down at lines 17 to 22 on the second page. Is that what you were describing in your paragraph B in your witness statement, that you could go in another way, in which case it would be difficult to see who had made changes, and that this was the hack?
No, it's what I was describing in paragraph C.
I see. So the paragraph B of your witness statement, we could log in through Riposte another way. I can't remember the details, in which case it would be difficult to see who had made the changes. Can you explain to us how that was done then?
I can't remember how it was done. I just know that you could do it. You could then have fiddled with the, for a better word, want of a better word, with the message store, but without the correct user ID at the start of every message, then there would have been errors. Things wouldn't have processed properly, from what I remember. So you wouldn't have gone in that way to make changes to the message store.
Okay, can we go back to your witness statement then to, it's page 6 of the witness statement. And look at C, the third way. We could go directly through the communication service to the post office gateway and then the counter. If the postmaster wasn't logged in, then there would be no ID attached to the database entries, which sometimes cause the batch processing to fail overnight. If the postmaster was logged on, then any changes we made would have their ID attached. So as far as the system and any auditing was concerned, the sub-postmaster would have been responsible for the transactions.
That's what I was trying to say. I think that's what I was trying to say in the post office transcript we just looked at.
Thank you.
So,
and was this a method that you used frequently, as described in subparagraph C?
we were all pretty adept at it, yeah.
Whether you were adept at it,
Sorry, fairly frequently, yes.
fairly frequently, okay. And why did you use that method?
It was the only way to rebuild the counters to get the data off the counters.
And the footprint that was left would have been the sub-postmaster's footprint and not yours?
Yes.
Was there any visibility that you or somebody else in the SSE had done this as opposed to the sub-postmaster themselves having done it?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
What would distinguish?
We would, it would, sometimes it would be recorded. This is, I'm a bit rusty on this now, I'm afraid, but sometimes we told the postmaster we were going to do it. While we were doing this, the postmaster couldn't use the counter. It's very important that nobody used it. But other times, especially if maybe the postmaster, I'm just trying to remember something else. I was going to say if the postmaster had gone to lunch, for instance, we could have gone in and done things without him knowing. There may have been a way to put the data in at the counter while the postmaster was actually logged off. There may have, I can't remember exactly, but there may have been a way to fool the counter into thinking that the postmaster had logged on to do it. Can't fully remember that. Certainly, if we were on occasion asked, I can't remember the details. I know that since the court case, it may be during the court case, I saw documentation to the effect that we had at times gone into the counter without postmaster or even Pol knowing to make changes to the data. Under the way that I'm talking of item C here. So the postmaster may have logged on and gone to lunch and left the computer logged on. So then we went in, made the changes we needed to fix the problem, and then logged out again, leaving the postmaster completely unaware that we'd done it.
Can we go over the page on your witness statement, please, to look at the security protocols about accessing sub-postmasters' systems, and look at paragraph 15. You say the inquiry has asked about security protocols regarding access to sub-postmasters' systems. I don't remember any security protocols. We sometimes connected to post office counters without the postmaster being aware that we were looking over their shoulder. In the early days, I frequently logged on to counters to see what was happening. There was no record of my doing so, but I think this changed after I had left.
Yeah.
Can we look, please, at the transcript again of the High Court trial? And that's poll 404074. And page 33, please. And it's the bottom left-hand quadrant. And it's line 22 at the foot of the page. This is partway through your answer. You say, in circumstances, we could do that. In other instances, the way I remember it is that for the system to operate correctly for the accounting, it had to be the same user ID logged on, so that the postmaster or that top right clerk or whatever would have to be logged on with their ID and password, so that any data we changed or put back on would then go in with their ID, which is why they couldn't use it. Then that data would be picked up correctly by Riposte. Riposte would assume that the postmaster had been operating as normal and would accept the data into the message store and process it correctly. Question, could you tell me what were the circumstances in which you had to use the same ID as the original user? Answer, I can't remember what the differences were for the different errors, but it depended on what error was coming up and what bit of data was corrupt, where the corruption lay in the message store. Question, so you can't think of a specific reason why it would have to be the same person, but you're saying that it did sometimes. Answer, yes, sorry, I didn't let you finish. I've lost my train of thought now, sorry. It often made it much cleaner for accounting reasons. From what I remember, if it was the same user ID, all of these actions would be detailed in the Pinnacle. And if, from what I remember, if you were accessing the counter in this way, 2 people had to be there. One was an independent witness to make sure that everything was going correctly. So just stopping there, are you describing here that there needed to be 2 people, one of whom was an independent witness, to witness the hack that you've described?
If you were making changes to the database, putting data in, then yes. They would watch as you went through all the steps to clean the data up, just as a double check to make sure that you hadn't made a mistake and deleted something in error. I think that stemmed from an issue when at some point somebody did make an error and it really messed up the processing later. So that was a lesson learned as we were going along. Again, my memory is very hazy on this, but I think that's why it was that we then employed 2 people to make sure that there weren't mistakes.
And then scrolling down, counsel asks you, so there would have to be what we now call peaks, and there'd have to be 2 pairs of eyes. You say that was what, and then he carried on. It would never be left to one particular member of the SSC to do it on his own. Answer, it was never supposed to be, and I don't think it ever was, but I'm not sure. Question, so this is a formal process then, is it? You answered yes, which the SSC took very seriously. Answer, it was developed and taken very seriously. Yes. And so did the position change over your time within the SSC?
I think so. I can't really remember. Also, reading the next line from 16 to 19.
Yes.
That's where, at that point, reading this, I believed that formal consent from the post office was required. It was after this that I saw the documentation that contradicts this, and there's actually times when the post office weren't informed.
So carrying on reading then from 16, from 14, just to get the question, he asked you, is it also the case that the post office consent was always needed for this kind of process? You said, when I was there, we were supposed to speak to the postmaster to get his consent. So from post office consent, that's what I believe you mean by that. Formal consent from the post office itself, maybe not. Just stopping there, did you always speak to the postmaster to get consent?
From what I remember now, no. But memory is a funny thing, and sometimes after this length of time, you remember things that didn't actually happen. So I can't completely, hand on heart, say that that's true or not.
You mentioned that you had seen something after giving evidence here that had maybe changed your view. What was that?
There was some documentation that came up right at the end of my interrogation that it may have been right at the end, it may have been after I left. I saw it, and it was a statement, I think it was from Mick Peach, saying that we weren't to inform the post office of this particular item. I can't remember exactly what it was.
Other than the postmaster themselves, do you remember any communication, written or verbal, between you and other members of the SSC team and post office managers or somebody within security within the post office or something like that before you undertook this exercise, this hack?
No, the only person we would have spoken to for any authorization would have been Mick Peach, the manager. Everything came through him, really.
Thank you. We can take that down now. So I wonder whether we might unusually ask for an earlier lunch today. There's been some quite heavy transcripts that I've gone through with Mr. Roll, and I suspect that he, but also me, would appreciate a break. So can we break for lunch?
Of course. 1:45?
Yes, thank you very much, sir.
Fine. See you then.
Thank you.